Yo, what's going on, guys? DJ Icon, and welcome to this edition of Tech Talk, brought to you by ClubKillers.com. This week, I'm going to walk you guys through how I did my 101-track mega mix in Ableton Live. Stay tuned.
Club Killers Tech Talk, hosted by Icon.
So the first thing we want to do is scroll down to Ableton Live, double click, open it, and that brings you to this page. This is not the workspace that we want to work in, so you simply hit tab, and that brings you to the mix window. The first thing that I like to do when approaching a project that's going to be large like this is to organize my mix into sections before I even start importing music. So what we're going to do is we're going to create groups. So simply take your cursor, hover over MIDI track 1 and MIDI track 2, and hit delete, because we don't need those. And now you're left with audio tracks. Audio tracks are what we're going to be using. So the first thing you want to do is we want to replicate these audio tracks multiple times. So for demonstration purposes, I'm going to create 9 or 10 new audio tracks. So you simply hit Command T, and that replicates a track, and hit that 9 or 10 times. Then you're going to scroll to the top, hover your cursor over audio track 1, left click, scroll to the bottom, hold shift, left click, and that highlights all the tracks at once. Now we're going to create a group. So Command G puts all those tracks into our very first group. Now we're going to rename that group. So Command R, and we're going to call this group Intro. Then once the group is created and named, simply scroll down to this little black arrow, left click, and that minimizes your group into this little workable block. So now we're going to create our next group. So Command T, and then Command T again, to create as many tracks as we want. Hold over the track, left click to highlight, scroll down, hold shift, highlight them all, Command G forms the group, highlight, Command R to rename, and we're going to call this one West Coast. Now hover the black arrow, minimize, and we'll do one more just for demonstration purposes. So Command T, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Hover, highlight, scroll down, hold shift, left click, highlight them all, Command G to form the group, highlight, Command R to rename, and we'll call this one Reggae. So once I've gone through and done that for the groups that I know I want to incorporate into my mix. Now I may add more groups or take groups away once the mix gets going, but this is just a really good way just to get started. Now the next thing I want to do before I start importing my music is to go up here and set my timeline. So if you go up into the left hand corner where my cursor is, click, highlight where that says 120, and set the BPM of the area that you're going to be working in. So the intro, I know I want to be around 104 to 105 BPM. Hit enter. And now my grid is mapped out to that number. So the way that I like to start my mixes is to just simply start by opening the group, holding Command Tab, opening Serato, and then all I do is I will simply start dragging in songs that fit the criteria of my group. So for instance, intro. I may delete songs, I may add songs. This is simply just to get the workflow going. So let's say I'll drag in 3 songs. Just tap the window again to bring you back into Ableton Live. And as you can see right now, I have 3 tracks loaded, but I only want to work one at a time. So simply scroll over to this yellow box, left click, and that mutes each track. So So the very first thing that you want to do once you start your mix is to get the tracks quantized. So you're going to highlight the track, you're going to hold your cursor over and double click, and that brings you up down here to the edit window. So you may see some tracks that when you import will be like this, and you'll notice that if I move this around the grid, this track doesn't fall on the one beat, and that's because it's not starting at the correct point. So what you do is go down here, take this black arrow, and wherever this black arrow falls is the first beat of the track that you'll hear in Ableton Live. So I want to scroll this over. This is the first beat of the track. And now, if I play my song, you'll notice that's the one beat. So I want to bring this back to the beginning. So the next step in quantizing, once you're in the clip edit window, make sure your track is on beat, then go down to where it says segment BPM, this number right here. Click on it, and this little black box appears. That means it's able to be edited by you. What you'll notice, especially with old school tracks or live bands, is that this number will not be a whole number. So it may be 101.37 or 102.68 or 101.97 in this case. And that's due to these songs being played by live instruments or swing added by the engineer. So what we want to do is get rid of that, because that makes our life way more difficult once we're laying this out. So simply look at the number, and in this case, I want it to be 102, type in 102, hit enter, and then scroll down to where it says beats, and we don't want to use beats, we want to use Complex Pro. What Complex Pro is, it's the algorithm that Ableton Live assigns to each of your tracks and how it processes it. So Quantize Pro, for instance, if you're using a timeline that's around 105, but you may be importing songs that are 98 or 108, or they may be a little faster or slower, it removes the chipmunk effect, or if the song's a little slower, the kind of deepening of the vocals that you'll get from speeding or slowing the track up. It also processes the quantizing the most effectively. But that being said, it also puts the largest strain on your computer's CPU. So if you don't have a very strong computer, just be aware that once you start getting into 50 plus tracks, your computer might start to slow down a little bit. So now if I play this track, it sounds good. And if I go to 9, which would be the end of the intro, I can see that this falls perfectly on beat. So track 1 is done. So now I would repeat for track 2, highlight, double click, make sure it's on the 1. I can see here this is 101.03, and I want that to be 101. Beats, Complex Pro. And then what I do is I'll just simply drag this song over. This isn't where I would actually mix it in real life. I'm just wanting to make sure that it's on beat and it sounds good. So unmute, scroll to the right, highlight over where the yellow tab is, left click, that activates the track. So I can hear that it's on beat. Now I'm not worried about volumes or mix locations or anything right now. I'm just simply making sure my songs are quantized and on beat. So now we're going to go to track number 3. double click. And in this track, I can see that it's 104.34. So the first thing I'm going to do in this case is go to Complex Pro. And now we're going to analyze this a little bit more. I typically will only round up or round down to the closest whole number if it's within 0.15 of the whole number. So for instance, if it was 104.85, I would round up to 105. Or if it was 105.15, I would round down to 105 even. In this case, we're kind of falling in an area that I'm not really comfortable with adding a whole number because I don't know how much it's going to alter it. So let's take this back over here, and I'm going to mute the first track, and I'm just going to play this and see how well it's quantized. So I can hear that while it ends correctly, in the middle here, I can hear that some of the beats are off. So this is going to require manual quantization. So the very first thing you're going to want to do is go down to your edit, your clip window at the very bottom. And if you see, if I'm zooming in and out, all you do is simply hover your cursor in this area right here. It brings up a magnifying window. If you scroll down, it zooms in. Scroll up, it enlarges or shrinks it. And if you scroll right or left, you can move along the timeline. So what I want to do is shrink this to where I can see my first 16 beats, or to 5. And then go through and I can see these should be falling exactly on these numbers. So, this should be lining up with this grid point, and, right here, this is on, but these are off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hover over one of these, and if you notice, if you hover over these, it brings up these little gray arrows. These are going to be your quantization marker points. So simply hover over one, double click, and that makes it yellow. Now if you zoom in, we know that we want this beat to fall right on this line. So simply drag it over. But what you'll notice is it dragged this part over, but it may have dragged some of the other parts too far. But let's see how the very first 8 count sounds now. So that sounds a lot better than the very first time that we played it, but now I'm still noticing that some of these are a little bit off. So for instance, I can see where this clap is supposed to fall on 3-2. So same thing, I'm going to highlight, double click, drag, kind of shrink down so I can get a really good idea. And anywhere that you want, it's like, let's say you don't want this to start at the very beginning, just simply take your mouse, hover over, left click once, and wherever this line is that is flashing, that's where, when you press the space bar, is where the song will play from. So in this case, we'll start right here. And you can hear that that sounds really good. Let's start at the very beginning. All right, so that's definitely sounding a lot better. I can still hear it's a little tiny bit off right at the halfway point. So we'll come back over here. Again, hover over the arrow, double click. Let's give it one little punch. That's actually a little far for me, I think. So now we have the first 16 beats are on. Now we're going to work on our second 16. And I can hear this clap is a little fast. I'm going to bring that back. Go back here. And you can hear one of those beats is off. Okay, so now we can hear that's pretty close. And so once I've gotten each track quantized, then what I like to do is just start laying them out. And so I would simply mute the tracks that I don't want to listen to. In this case, More Money, More Problems. And you know what? I think that More Money, More Problems would go better after Jump. So if I simply highlight a track, I can move it up and down in the project by just simply highlighting and moving it up or moving it down. Make sure the other tracks are muted. And now let's find a mix point. So if you go over, find your first mix point, add locator, I can say this is the Jump chorus. And then that way, once I start moving tracks all around, I always have a reference point of, okay, I know this is the Jump chorus. Then unmute, and now let's see. So right off the bat, I can tell that, one, these tracks don't sound necessarily great together. There's a lot of, things going on, and More Money, More Problems is a lot louder. So simply hover it over, left click, and scroll down, and that will lower the track by 1 or 2 decibels. So right off the bat, I can tell I don't like the way these songs are going together. It sounds like Jump needs some additional quantization. So let's try Get Low. So right off the bat, you can tell that sounds a lot better. So at this point, what I'd like to do is, I know that this would be where I'm mixing out. So I want to get rid of everything else that I'm not going to use from a track. This makes it way easier from a visual standpoint to know kind of what's going on in your mix, as well as I just don't want to see it. So if I take my cursor and I scroll over, I can highlight individual sections of the song, highlight one section, just simply hit the delete button, and that erases one section, and then just highlight the other section, which is the remaining balance of the song, delete, and now it's gone. And so now we have our very first mix. Alright guys, so now I've demonstrated how you import the tracks, set up the project, form your groups, get the tracks on beat through quantization, mark them, and start laying out the mix. Now I'm going to exit out of this and I'm going to go into my actual mixtape, and I'll show you guys how I laid that one. Alright guys, so I've opened up my project in Ableton Live. If you want to change the color of a group like I have here, just simply highlight the group and right click, and you can select from the color palette down below. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to play a section of the mix so you guys can see what's going on, and then I'll break it down from there.
You ready, Mace?
Party people in the place to be. It's about that time.
Let's take it back to the old school. Wave your hands like you just don't care. Let's take it back to the old school. Wave your hands like you just don't care. Let's take it back to the old school. Wave your hands like you just don't care. Let's take it back to the old school.
This is how we do it. I wish I was a little bit taller. I wish I was a baller. I wish I had a girl who looked good. I would call her. Wish I had a rabbit in a hat with a bat and a 6-point parlor.
All I wanna do is on my zone, and a boom, boom. All I wanna do is on my zone, and a boom, boom. All I wanna do is on my zone, and a boom, boom.
Here we go now. Here we go.
All I wanna do is on my zone, and a
Here we go
boom, boom.
now. Here we go now. Here we go.
All I wanna do is on my zone, and a boom, boom.
Here we go now. Here we go now. Here we go. Here we go. Let me clear my throat. Get that. Come on, now.
So that's the first couple minutes that I put together for my intro, and you can see there's a lot going on. So the first thing that I like to do, when I start to put a project like this together is, like we did in the demo, I just go through my list, drag in a bunch of songs that fit within the criteria of the group that I'm, looking to construct. In this case, I wanted old school tracks that were around 104 BPM that people would recognize, that also had energy. So usually a good way to get started is I always pick a song that has an intro that the host of the mix can use, whether it's me or Alex from Club Killers or whatnot, that is also recognizable. So in this case, I picked Feel So Good by Mace, and I like it because it has this intro.
You ready, Mace?
Party people in the place to be. It's about that time.
And it ends with "It's About That Time," which gives me the ability to drop into anything else that I want to very cleanly. So the very first track that I selected was Take It Back to the Old School, and I simply used this one as my starting point because, one, it was an acapella that directly related to the mix I was trying to create, but then also I like to start with an acapella because I wish I could say that there was just some formula that I have that to put these together, but the simple fact is that it's really just trial and error. I probably worked on this intro part for about 6 hours. There was probably realistically about 8 different versions of it where I was just moving things around, trying different combinations, starting with "This Is How We Do It," or the Humpty Dance instrumental, or playing the song or not playing the song, or playing the beat, or there's tons and tons of different variations. So I like to start with an acapella just simply because it's a good starting point and I can drop multiple things under it at once just to kind of get the ball rolling. And this is what I came up with.
Let's take it back to the old school. Wave your hands like you just don't care. Let's take it back to the old school. Wave your hands like you just don't care. Let's take it back to the old school. Wave your hands like you just don't care. Let's take it back to the old school.
This is how we do it.
One tip that I have that really helps me keep organized, which in return helps me put the mix together more quickly and more efficiently, is you want to set it up where each track you see is kind of cascading down in the mix. So the track that is playing is always above the track that is next. So in this case, it goes Take It Back to the Old School, into Can't Hold Me Down instrumental, into Let's Get High instrumental, into This Is How We Do It, you know, versus having one track up here and another track up here. That can start to get really, really confusing as you're going up and down in your mix. Another tip that I have that really helps a lot is, let me get rid of that, is these little tiny mixes that you see where I've added, like, you know, I introduced the Let's Get High instrumental with the stutter and the This Is How We Do It scratch. You want to go ahead and put those into your mix after you've constructed the entire section of it. Reason being is like I said, I probably did, you know, 6 different versions of this intro, and I don't want to have to go back and change those. Or, you know, if I decide I don't want to use the Let's Get High instrumental and I erase it, I've just spent 20 minutes putting together these little effects that are no longer needed. And that just wastes time. So you want to go through and do all of those little tiny mixes at the very, very end. Another thing that I like to incorporate when doing a mega mix is try to find songs that are extremely recognizable or acapellas that are a 4 to 8 count that you know people would sing, which allows you to transition from one instrumental to the next seamlessly while keeping the energy up. And a good example would be the This Is How We Do It. Everyone knows it. It comes out of this really cleanly.
This is how we do it. I wish I was a little bit taller.
You recognize it, you're able to drop right into something else, and it keeps the energy up really well. So once you've gone through and you've constructed, oh, and see, I made a mistake right here. This should be up there. And you know, some people I've seen like to even color code their individual tracks. As if it's an instrumental, for instance, it would be blue. If it's an acapella, it would be purple. And anything that, you know, is a scratch, maybe green, for instance. That's another way to do it to help keep organized. So once I have a section of the mix that I really like, the next thing that I like to do is go in and lay in my secondary edits. And what my secondary edits are things like the stuttering, the scratching, and then EQing and getting the volumes correct for each track. So it's really important when you're working with acapellas that you want to EQ the bass out of your acapella. And the way that we do that is you highlight the track on the right hand side, go over to your left hand side and go to the audio effects window. It's set to sounds by default, so you want to click audio effects, and then in our case we want an EQ, so we're going to go down to EQ 8 and you simply double click, and that brings up your Ableton plugins window. Now if you want to go back to the clip edit window, simply go down to the left and click this little window, or click this window, and that will shuffle between the two. So in this case, I already have an EQ, so I'm going to delete the one that I just put in there, and I'm going to show you guys the one that I have. So if we play this, you can see what the EQ is doing.
Let's take it back to the old school. Wave your hands like you just don't care. Let's take it back to the
So
old
you can see on the graph that I've eliminated the bass from the track by clicking on the one and dragging it over. So by default, it's set to this. What I did is just hit the one and drag it over. Now, if you notice, these numbers correlate to these orange boxes. These orange boxes represent a group of frequencies within your song. So 4 being your high frequencies, one correlating to your lowest frequencies. And you can select what each of these frequencies does by these drop-down windows. So if you hit the arrow, you'll see this window pops up. And if you hit this, for instance, this would be a bell curve, or what's another one? Or we could cut out all the highs. So depending on what your mix calls for, this gives you really good, easy options. And in this case, we're going to reduce the bass. And what I like to do is go to the very beginning, press play.
Let's take it back to the old school. Wave your hands like you just don't care. Let's take it back to the old school. Wave your hands like you just don't care.
And what I'm doing is I'm moving it to the right until I hear it being affected and it starts to become tinny or sound really weak. And then I'll just slowly back it off until it sounds natural, but still eliminating the lowest frequencies from your acapella. Now you can do much more extreme EQing with your acapellas or your instrumentals, but for this case, this should be plenty. Then the next step would be to set my volume.
Let's take it back to the old school. Wave your hands like you just don't care. Let's take it back to the old school. Wave your hands like you just don't care. Let's take it back to the old school. Wave your hands like you just don't care.
And same exact thing. What I'm looking to do is increase it until I know it's too loud, decrease it until I hear it's a little bit too low, and then increase the volume until I hear it sit just right. The next thing is to add any effect or plugin that helps with the transition of the song. So in this case, I have a simple delay. So I'm going to delete this and I'm going to show you guys how I set up delays in my tracks. So I'm going to go over to my audio effects window, scroll down, highlight simple delay, double click, and that brings it up down here. Now you can play with these parameters to taste. These affect the length of time of your delay. Now to adjust the on-off of the delay, highlight your track, go to these arrows, bring down the drop-down menu, and you'll see that I have an EQ, my multiband dynamics, and my simple delay, my 3 plugins that are assigned to this track. You can also operate directly from the track window itself. So highlight simple delay, and you'll see that there's this perforated red stripe. Double click that. That means that the effect has been turned on wherever this thick red line crosses the track. So if I played it right now, you can hear that the effect is being applied all the way across, but we don't want that. We only want it at the very end. So I'm going to create another dot or node and then simply drag it down, and you see that it says off. So I want this to come on the 4-beat or the clap. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And now I'm going to take this and simply move it over. And wherever this line falls is where your effect will start from.
Your hands like you just don't care. Let's take it back to the old school. This is how.
So you hear that it starts right there and it ends a little short. So if you wanted to increase the length of time that your effect plays for, simply go down to where it says simple delay, highlight, click on the feedback, and increase the feedback. And let's see how that sounds.
Yeah, let's take it back to the old school. This is how we do it.
And you can hear that it's echoing out for much longer. So what I want to do is decrease this a little bit, and now let's see how in between those two sound.
Yeah, let's take it back to the old school. This is how we do it.
That sounds pretty good. Now, if you're wondering what dry wet does, dry wet turns on or turns off the amount of the effect. So feedback affects time. This affects basically the power of the effect. But generally speaking, I only mess with feedback. So once I've gone through and I've adjusted my EQ, my volumes and any transitional effects that I have. Then the next thing I do is I master the group. So I'll go up and I'll hit the group. I'll make sure that all my other groups are muted. And if I double click, you'll notice that my clip window is blank. And that's because I haven't added any effects yet. When I master a group, what I want to concentrate on is compression. Compression is taking away the dynamic range of your track. And what that basically does is it just smooths out the highs and the lows of your track, making it sound more uniform. And we do that with a compressor. So I'll go over to my audio effects, double click compressor, and that brings up my compressor inside the effects window. And now I'm going to play a sample of my track.
Let's take it back to the old school.
This is how we do it. I wish I was a little bit taller. I wish I was a baller. I wish I had a girl.
And I notice that in my volume, I'm not quite hitting the reds. And so there's a little bit room for increase in volume. But I don't want to increase the volume with this. I want to increase the perception of volume with the threshold slider on the compressor. And if you play the track and you adjust this down, you'll notice right away what this does.
Let's take it back to the old school.
You can hear this really squashing.
I wish I was a little.
So if you compress something all the way, it kind of squashes the sound. What we're looking for is just the amount on the slider of the threshold where it starts to affect the track.
Let's take it back to the old school.
This is how we.
So right about there. And you can see where the track is being affected within this middle column. So I play it.
Let's take it back to the old school.
This.
So every time that the compressor is hitting, you'll see it, the amount of compression right here. And if you wanted to increase the amount of volume, you could do this. But you'll notice that this introduces tons of artifacting if done too much.
Let's take it back to the old school.
This is.
And I typically recommend don't using the volume output unless it's an extreme circumstance. So now we've gone through and we've composed and we've mastered each of our groups and we've got them in an arrangement that we like. Then the next thing we want to do is work within the master channel. And in this case, I have a compressor and I have a limiter. Let me go ahead and turn these on. So what the compressor is doing on the master track is it's raising the lowest volume of the track and decreasing the volume of the loudest parts, making it more uniform. And what the limiter is doing is any sound that's too loud for the compressor to compensate for, the limiter is catching and decreasing the amount of volume in the absolute loudest part of the tracks. And if I play it, you can see both of them working together. Just like the compressor, anytime a part of the track is too loud, you can see that it's squashing just a little bit. And if you look at a track that's been mastered like in iTunes and you've noticed that they become extremely uniform, that's due to compression and a limiter working together. Now there are many types of compression and many types of limiters. For instance, if we go up to the compressor and we click this down arrow, you'll see that Ableton Live provides you with some templates. And I would recommend going through and applying these to your track to see how each one sounds. You don't want to over-compress or over-limit any part of your tracks because that will introduce a large amount of artifacting and it sounds terrible. So the last thing that I like to do before I export my mix is do any tempo changes to the song that I haven't done before. And we do tempo changes in the master track window. So simply go down to the right hand side, highlight the master track, and you'll see by default it's set to the mixer and song tempo. And the reason that I wait to do this till the very end is if you'll notice right now, if just like an effect, if I hover my cursor over the red line and activate it by double clicking, it brings up a number which is 104. And 104 matches the number that I set as my master tempo at the beginning. Now, if I move this up or if I move this down, you'll see that these numbers start to become fractional. And why that's important is if you're moving this as you're working on your track, you'll notice that my songs no longer fall right on the one beat, but they're off of the grid. The grid no longer matches up perfectly. So you can drastically increase the amount of time it takes to put your mix together by adjusting this before you get to the very end.
Yeah, let's take it back to the old school.
This is how we do it. I wish I was a little bit taller. I wish I was a baller. I wish I had a girl who looked good. I would call her. Wish I had a rabbit in a hat.
All right, guys, that's a wrap. Good luck on your mega mixes. If you liked this video, hit like. If you loved it, hit subscribe, and we'll see you guys next week.